What if the reason you rock a crying baby has nothing to do with comfort? What if it's about keeping your whole group alive? A crying baby at night was not just exhausting for ancient humans. It was dangerous. Sound travels farther than light in the dark, farther than smell, farther than anything the fire gave off. And every predator nearby had learned exactly what a thin, repeating cry meant. Something small, something weak, something easy. So when a baby would not stop crying, the fear was never simple. It was, who is listening right now? Wolves listened. Big cats listened. Anything that hunted at night had learned, over generations of its own, that a certain pitch of sound meant an easy meal was close and undefended. The cry did not need to carry far. It only needed to reach the wrong set of ears once. No white noise machine could help here. No car ride to nowhere. No pacifier, no neighbor to apologize to in the morning. Just open darkness, a low fire, and a sound that would not stop. In a small camp, almost nothing was private. A crying baby was not one family's problem. It belonged to everyone in earshot, because everyone in earshot was now easier to find. Someone would lean up on an elbow. Someone would glance at the treeline. No one needed to say why. A crying baby in daylight was almost a different event entirely. In daylight, the group could see the danger, if there was any. At night, they could only guess at it, and guessing is where fear grows the fastest. The same cry that barely registered at noon could feel unbearable at 2 in the morning, not because the sound had changed, but because the darkness around it had. The oldest members of the group often reacted first, and reacted differently. They had lived through more nights than anyone else at the fire, more false alarms and more real ones, and their bodies had learned to separate the two. An elder's stillness could calm a camp faster than any words. An elder's sudden alertness could do the opposite in an instant. Even the youngest members of the group understood this without being told. Children who had grown up around the fire learned early that a certain kind of cry changed the air in the camp. Play stopped. Voices dropped. Something in the adults shifted, and the children copied it instantly, the way children always copy fear before they understand it. The mother's body was already at its limit. There was no recovery month after birth, no scheduled help, no one else who could feed the baby the way she could. And now, in the dark, she had to make the crying stop before it brought something toward the camp. Exhaustion narrows the mind. The longer the crying went on, the smaller her options felt. And here's the uncomfortable question. Was the group's patience really about comfort, or about self-preservation dressed up as help? Minutes stretched. Somewhere in the dark, someone shifted with a sigh they tried to hide. No one said it directly. Ancient groups rarely needed to. A glance held too long. A body turning away instead of toward. The mother felt this before she could name it, because humans have always sensed disapproval before they can explain it. She was carrying two weights now. A baby who would not settle, and a group whose trust in her felt like it was slipping with every minute the crying continued. This is the part that's easy to miss. A struggling parent in a small tribe was never just struggling alone. She was a risk the whole group had to manage, because one infant's cry could put every sleeping body in that camp in more danger. A night like this was rarely forgotten by the group, even if no one spoke of it again. Long after the crying stopped, people remembered whose baby had cried the longest, and whose hands had finally settled it. Memory was the only record ancient humans kept, and it did not forget kindness any faster than it forgot failure. There is a reason the crying itself was built this way. An infant's cry is not a random sound. It is one of the most acoustically piercing signals a human body can produce, tuned by evolution to be almost impossible to ignore. A baby who could be easily tuned out by a tired parent was a baby less likely to get fed, warmed, or protected in time. So the babies who survived were the ones whose cries cut through sleep, through distance, through exhaustion itself. The very thing that made the sound so hard for the camp to bear at night was the same thing that had once kept infants alive for hundreds of thousands of years. Some groups had an answer for the worst moments, one that sounds harsh at first. If a baby's crying could not be settled and the risk to the camp felt too high, a mother might carry the baby a short distance away, just far enough that the sound thinned before it reached open wilderness, close enough that she was never truly alone. It was not abandonment. It was containment, a way of protecting both the infant and the group at the same time, born from a calculation no one had to say out loud. But here's what almost nobody realizes. The methods that worked in the end weren't invented in that moment. They were inherited. Rocking, a slow repeating sway that echoed 9 months of movement inside the body that carried the baby. Skin against skin, warmth and heartbeat together, saying something to a baby's nervous system before language ever existed to explain it. A low hum in the chest, close enough to feel rather than only hear. No one needed a manual. The babies who calmed to rhythm, warmth, and touch were the babies who survived long enough to become someone's ancestor. Every soothing instinct alive today is an old survival strategy wearing a gentler name. Sometimes another woman would step in, not from duty, but because more hands near the infant meant better odds that something would work in time. This was cooperative parenting long before anyone gave it that name. Anthropologists call it alloparenting. The idea that human infants were never raised by one pair of hands alone, but by a whole circle of them, passed shoulder to shoulder through the night. In several hunter-gatherer societies studied by anthropologists, infants are held and comforted by many different caregivers across a single day, not only the mother. Aunts, older children, grandmothers, sometimes men who are not the father at all. Humans may be one of the only primates that evolved to share the physical burden of an infant this widely, and a crying baby in the night was exactly the moment that shared system was built for. And here's the second question we're sitting with. If it took an entire group to calm one crying baby, what does that say about how humans were built to raise children in the first place? Maybe not in isolation. Maybe never in isolation at all. Then all at once relief. The crying would slow, then stop. The baby's breathing would even out against a shoulder, and the whole camp would exhale together, even the ones who had said nothing all night. It was never only about one baby falling asleep. It was a threat window closing. The fire would get a little brighter as someone finally added wood without worrying the sound would carry too far. Conversations that had been held to whispers returned to normal volume. Somewhere, someone finally let themselves fall back asleep. So what if the panic you feel when your own baby won't stop crying isn't really about the crying at all? What if some part of you is still listening for something in the dark, the same way that ancient camp once did? White noise machines exist because ancient wombs had a steady sound. Rocking chairs and stroller walks exist because ancient bodies moved in rhythm. Swaddling exists because ancient infants were held close, wrapped in the same pressure that once told a nervous system the world was still safe. Even the modern instinct to bring a crying baby into another room, away from a partner trying to sleep, echoes that same old fear of a sound traveling too far. And that old circle of caregivers never really disappeared either. It just changed shape. New parent groups, grandparents flying in for the first weeks, a friend who takes the baby for an hour so someone can sleep. All of it is the same alloparenting instinct, reaching for hands beyond the two it started with. The exhaustion a new parent feels when that circle is missing is not weakness. It is a very old system running without the support it was built to expect. Your body isn't overreacting when nothing seems to work. It's reacting the way bodies reacted for hundreds of thousands of years, when a crying infant was never just a parenting moment. It was a signal into the dark. Now imagine that same night again. The same darkness, the same open camp, the same sound that would not stop. Except this time, you know exactly why every instinct in your body responds the way it does. It was never really about making the sound stop. It was about protecting the smallest, most vulnerable member of the group, at the exact moment the world outside the fire felt most dangerous. If this ancient instinct still feels familiar, subscribe to Primeval Psyche. Here, we decode modern behavior through ancient survival. The next fear may be much older than you think.